Hello everybody. So we continue on the chapter related to internal migration, and now we're gonna talk about these major concepts and definitions in internal migration. So let's just go to slide 16. And so a permanent residential move, either local or jurisdictional, is usually defined as a change in residence lasting at least a year in duration. So whenever you're talking about a migration, so we usually here in the US, internal migration is migration where you move at least from one county to the other, and we are talking about a permanent move that lasts at least a year. The residential migration of persons moving into an area of destination, it's called in-migration. If we are talking about migration from a specific state to the other, and we are counting, we are trying to understand the migrants in the area of destination, we are doing an analysis focusing on in-migration. And the migration of persons leaving an area of origin is known as out-migration. So maybe I'm talking about the same migration between two states, same migration flow between two states, but if I'm more concerned, I'm focusing more on the determinants of their origin, on the chances of migrating, I'm talking about out-migration. And another important concept on internal migration and migration as a whole is a return migration. So it is possible that a migrant might move back to one's area of origin during one's life course. Someone might migrate from an area of origin to destination, and then after a while that person might return to the area of origin. So that's exactly talking, we can do an analysis about return migration. So major migration terms that are important for us to understand intern or international migration. So remembering, internal migration is the permanent change in residence that happens within a country or between counties in the US as defined by the Census Bureau. And international migration, it's a permanent change in residence that happens between countries. And just these terms here are important for us to understand. So if we are talking about internal migration, so migration within countries, and we are talking from the point of view of the destination area, the receiving area, we are talking about in-migration. If we are talking from the point of view of the origin area, from the sending area, we are talking about out-migration. And then international migration between countries, if we are talking from the point of view of the country of destination, the receiving country, we are talking about immigration. And if we are talking from the point of view of the sending country, the country of origin, we are doing an analysis of immigration. So these are concepts related to international migration, immigration and immigration, and in-migration and out-migration related to internal migration. Two other indicators that are important for us to understand migration are net migration and gross migration. So when we subtract the number of out-migrants from the number of in-migrants of a given geographical area, we get net migration. So net migration is pretty much the number of in-migrants minus the number of out-migrants. And so this net migration could be positive, negative, or zero. Positive if there are more in-migrants than out-migrants, negative if we have more out-migrants than in-migrants in a specific area, and zero if we have the same number of in-migrants and out-migrants in a specific area. But when we add the number of in-migrants and out-migrants of a specific area, we get the gross migration. So in this case here, we are interested not to know about this net balance between in and out migration. We want to know the overall flow of migrants to and from a specific area. So we add both of these numbers here of in-migrants and out-migrants. And we can also use this information about net migration and gross migration to estimate migration efficiency. So when we divide an area's net migration by the gross migration, we get migration efficiency. So we say migration is positively efficient for an area when there has been a lot of in-migration and little out-migration in relation to the overall gross migration. And migration is negatively efficient for an area when there has been a lot of out-migration and little in-migration in relation to gross migration. When the numbers of in-migration and out-migration are about the same, so net migration is usually, it's going to be around 0, then migration efficiency for the area becomes inefficient. Some other concepts that are important to understand migration. So migration stream is a group of migrants having a common area of origin and a common area of destination during a specified migration interval. So a group of people moving from the same area of origin to the same area of destination in a specific time interval, this is a specific migration stream that a researcher might be interested in analyzing. A migration country stream is usually smaller in size and it moves in the opposite direction as the migration stream, but in the same time interval. So here, in migration counter stream, we're going to have the people moving from this area here to this area here. So it's exactly the opposite, but it's smaller in size. So in this case, let's say that we have a migration stream of migration, people moving from area A to area B. The migration counter stream is going to be people moving from B to A, but in that same time interval. And what is exactly this migration interval? Is a temporal dimension of migration defined by the researcher. So this time between the two events, namely the time of arriving at the area of destination and the time of departing the area of origin. In the American Community Survey, the migration interval is 1 year. So for example, in the American Community Survey in 2018, people were asked, where did you live exactly in April 1st, 2017, and where do you live now in April 1st, 2018? So it's pretty much capturing the migration between this interval of 1 year, from April 1st, 2017 to April 1st, 2018. And up to the 2000 census in the US, there was also people were also asked information about migration in the long form. So in the long form, in the 2000 census, the people were asked, where did you live 5 years before the census? So in that case, where were you living in April 1st, 1995, and where you are living now, April 1st, 2000. And just remember, April 1st is the census date, the reference date for the census in the US. So the migration interval can be in different ways. It can be defined by the researcher, but it can be defined by the survey itself. So up to the 2000 census, the long form had a migration interval of 5 years, and the American Community Survey since 2005, it has a migration interval of 1 year. So it's pretty much people migrating where the person lived 1 year before the American Community Survey and where the person is living right now. And from that, all these different studies, we can do an analysis of differences in migrant populations according to their demographic, social, and economic characteristics. So we can do analysis about differential migration. We can try to understand what are the characteristics, the social, economic, and demographic characteristics of populations in areas of origin and destination. And we can also do analysis about migration selectivity. So the migration process is selective. Not everyone stays and not everyone moves. So some people are more likely to migrate than others. And usually this selectivity is related to a series of demographic characteristics. So by age, usually people who are like in younger ages, young adults, are more likely to migrate than others. And migration rates also vary by race, ethnicity, by sex, by socioeconomic status. And this variation, it happens in different ways across countries and across time, and across different areas within a country as well. So age and education are major predictors of migration. So Americans aged 18 to 24 are more likely to move due to events such as college and employment. So we are talking about age. Young adults are more likely to migrate, and also those that are going to college are more likely to migrate, and those that are entering the labor market as well. And this study about selectivity is important because it varies by push and pull factors. And we talk about push and pull factors in the chapter about theories of demography, specifically about theories related to migration. So migrants tend to be positively selected when they are responding to positive pull factors in the area of destination. So the area of destination has some characteristics that attract people. So these characteristics that attract people are the pull factors. And when the area of destination has some positive pull factors that are attracting people, then the migrants moving to that area tend to be positively selected. So they tend to have higher levels of education, higher levels of training, of better skills to conduct more high-skilled jobs. And this process generates economic growth and high employment rate in the area of destination. And migrants tend to be negatively selected when they are responding to negative push factors in the area of origin. So in the area of origin, if you have some characteristics that are making people leave those areas, so those push factors are negative, such as economic stagnation, the people that tend to get out of this area of origin, they tend to be negatively selected. These migrants are less likely to have higher socioeconomic status than those responding to pull factors. So in this case here, migrants tend to be positively selected if the area of destination has this positive pull factor. So if the area of destination has economic growth and high employment rate, is going to attract people that have better socioeconomic status than the average. And in this case here, people who live in these areas that have economic stagnation or poverty or violence, a series of negative push factors, those migrants are less likely to have higher socioeconomic status. And in terms of variation of migration by age, which is something that we talked before in the diagram about proximate determinants of migration. So migration varies by age. So this here is a typical age profile of migrants, and putting here some key life course transitions. So when people start to enter or exit higher education, college, then their chances of migrating start to increase. And exactly around the ages 25 to 30, when people are entering the labor force, the chances of migrating are really high. So this is the migration intensity that we are talking here in the y-axis. And then after entering the labor force, then people tend to have higher chances of getting married, so partnership formation, and start to have children. But then when they start to have a more stable family life and more stable jobs, then the chances of migrating is starting to change. There can be exposure change in their jobs, but even then the chances of migrating tend to decrease because people tend to be more stable in the place where they live. And when their children leave home, they might also move. The chances of migrating is not so low, it's high, but it's lower than it was when they were entering the labor force. So the migration intensity keeps decreasing as people start to get older, And when people retire, there is a little increase in migration because maybe there is people migrating back to the areas where they were born, to the states where they were born, for example. And then it decreases again into later ages. And maybe after these people might go to some institutions to take care of elderly people, then the migration intensity increases again. So in some cases, in some countries, you don't see so clear these different patterns, but this is an overall a typical age profile of migration and these key life course transitions by age. And here's just some examples of migration intensity by age for China, Portugal, and Brazil. So in China, what you see is that you have a really high level of migration intensity in younger ages, so around 18, and usually because people migrate within China already at younger ages when they are entering a college. So they move to urban areas or to cities where they can go to college, and then they stay in those places, in those cities where they get a college degree. And so they move exactly because they are going to college, and then they find jobs over there, and so the chances of migrating start to decline. And what's interesting too about China is that the migration of children is really low. If we go back to the previous slide, we see that this migration intensity here for younger ages usually mirrors the migration of these people here around 30 and 45 years of age, because these are usually the parents taking the children with them in the migration flow. So these parents taking their children. But what you see in China is that these people here are migrating by themselves, not taking their children, because what happens a lot in China is the migration from rural to urban areas, only males going to urban areas, or can be more recently more females as well, but the other relatives, they stay back in the area of origin. In Portugal, you see the higher migration intensity in more older ages, around 30 years of age, exactly when people are they tend to enter the labor force. So it's not like in China where it's when usually are entering college. Here is where when people are entering the labor force. And migrants, migrants in younger ages, like children migrating, have higher rates than in China, and they tend to mirror a little more the migration of these adults here between 30 and 45. And then afterwards, as people get older, the chances of migration declines. And in Brazil, you also have the highest migration intensity around 25 years of age. The migration of children mirrors the migration of these adults here. But what you see is that the migration intensity in this peak here of people among 25 years of age is not so different than in other ages. So in China, you see a lot of variation by age, in Portugal as well. But in Brazil as a whole, this flows here, and we are talking about internal migration in those countries and using 5-year internal migration. The 5-year interval migration here is using migration from census data, and in Brazil there is not much variation across the age groups. So usually that shows that there is a more migration of the whole family from one area to the other within Brazil. And some examples about migration rates in the US. So this is internal migration rates in the US by age group. And here we have both information for the total population. So we have like individuals here being taken into account. And here we have the percent of individuals in each one of these ages moving from one area to the other in the US, from one county to the other. So the highest rates you encounter around 25, 24 years of age. But also when you consider information about the whole household moving from one county to the other, you have the pink curves here, but kind of like being kind of similar to when you get individual level data. But exactly because in older ages, individuals at older ages tend to move to facilities where they will be taken care of, and it's higher chances for specific individuals than the rates of individuals are higher than when you consider the whole household, because some members of the household, they don't migrate, but usually some others that need more assistance, they have more chances to migrate. But then, so this is to give you an idea that pattern of higher rates of migration exactly at ages where people start to get into the labor market is higher, and the migration of children here mirrors the migration of parents. Right? So that's exactly to show that these children here are migrating with these parents there. So I finish here this portion of the internal migration chapter. Thank you very much.